Thank you. Moving on to discussion, Ms. Fike.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think I can say it better than our public forum speakers. I had planned to say something to similar effects. I understand the justifications for this. I understand that before what we're proposing to take out says for any reason including but not limited to. I understand that, but I do think that now is not the time to make this change, and so I don't support this.
Thank you, Ms. Fike. Ms. Owen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sure we've all spent significant time talking to people about this policy and the proposed language change. I support a policy that is clear and concise while also being broad enough to cover everything that it needs to. And over time, a lot of our policies have become bloated. This particular policy has actually grown both better and worse over time. There was a time when our harassment policy covered only sexual harassment. So if a student or staff member were harassed for any other reason or any unknown reason, there was absolutely nothing to be done. And it was a very long time ago, but also during that time, if a person were reporting it over and over, that person would end up seeing some disciplinary action rather than the other way around. So I think that over time, we have made this policy much stronger. However, I don't always see it being truly looked into when things come up. I think it's a lot easier to say, well, there's no proof, than to really, really look for that proof. And I think that's something that we as a board need to hold everyone accountable for. I believe that this language change meets the requirements that I usually feel good about for being concise and clear and also being broad. I also feel like it's legally appropriate, and on Monday I would have voted in favor of it. Since then, it's become very clear to me that this issue isn't just divisive, it's a lot worse than that. Regardless of our intent, there are a lot of people in our community who see this change as this board adopting a philosophy that we've never even talked about. And that's concerning because we're not going to be able to convince them otherwise. I've already been contacted by a person who used very specific, disparaging, concerning, and frankly disgusting language regarding our students. The person made it clear that the revised language made her feel very empowered to say those things and to sign her name to it. And therefore, even though we feel like this language is legally appropriate and provides the appropriate legal protection, if this language change makes people feel empowered to treat our kids that way, that's something that there's no way I can support. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Owen. Mr. Diepler, do you want to, I know we discussed this at the last policy review. Do you want to kind of weigh in on that? I know your light was on.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So since Monday when this was discussed, I've heard from both sides of the aisle, and frankly, what I've heard is socio-political arguments about, the merits of this and the demerits of this. And, and again, I've heard from both sides. The suggestion, the recommendation was made purely for legal purposes. As I indicated Monday night, LGBTQ individuals are protected under the harassment law, have been for decades, and it's gotten even better for those individuals recently. There have been court cases come out since 2015, and as late as last year in 2020 that have strengthened those principles. So, again, legally, as Ms. Owen indicated, I mean, it makes sense. However, Obviously, sounds like a lot of people are concerned about some other issues other than harassment. They're concerned about, other political issues before this nation and this state and everywhere else, such as restrooms, such as sports, and things of that nature. Okay, so in any event, that's what I've heard since Monday. I would also say this, again, for the good of the board, the good of the school system. One other thing that this board could do is to send it back to policy review and do something similar to what UT has done. And UT has put in their harassment policy that changes to applicable law and/or binding legal precedent may impact the applicability of certain provisions of this policy. So this board could look at something like that, instead of having to change the language. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Diepler. I know Mr. Watson and then Reverend Butler. I think it was that order. Yep. There's a lot of discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for those who chose to come and speak to the issue in front of the board, and also those who reached out and communicated to us this week. Mr. Duper, I just want to confirm that I heard something correctly, I think both in policy review and the other night. I remember you stating that in other places in our policy manual, this type of language is already reduced to just the word sex. Is that correct? Or am I misremembering that? I know we had that discussion relative to legal guardian, but is that also true of this particular topic where there is other language that just says sex in other policies?
That's correct.
Okay. Are there any other existing policies that state this more full language that we still have on the books, or is this the only one that you're aware of?
I was reminded of that the other night, and Mr. Mayshark and I talked about that, but I hadn't looked at the policy. I believe there is one that talks about it perhaps in the employee
in the employee section?
Yeah.
Okay. So the reason I'm asking you those questions, Mr. Dupler, is because I think the board and I think the law department has come to this in good faith, and I do think it was an attempt to, again, simplify the policy, as Ms. Owen stated as well. We've taken similar steps in other areas right now, like the legal guardian, and to be able to bring some more clarity. That being said, I was disappointed, very much so, in some of the emails that I received this week, in that, just like Ms. Owen stated, for some, this change does signal something to them. And something to me that, again, to Mr. Dupler's point, the board has not intended to make a socio-political statement. At least I hope we have not in this statement. I would hope that we would have a much more robust discussion if that's something that we were going to present in the board. But there's definitely people in our community who have watched this and who have followed this who are making the assumption that Knox County schools, by reducing this language, is making some type of statement. And in some ways, I think are thinking we are making a statement to that actually could feel harassing to people, which is interesting because it's a anti-harassment policy, which is really unfortunate that we would be shifting language and people would use that as an opportunity, maybe not to directly harass somebody by sending us an email, but certainly have indicated to me they're more than willing to harass somebody in the larger community. And so for that reason, I can't support this change. I do support the idea of bringing it back to policy review and seeing if we can have a more robust discussion about what do we need to do to shift this policy, both to continue to offer the protections that we want to offer and need to be offering, but also to make it more clear. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I think the people who probably emailed me and probably all of you probably hope that their statement was a stamp of approval to all of us. At least for me, it wasn't. It was very much seeing the uglier side of what this thing is trying to actually do and to protect. And as a person of faith, I'm against all forms of harassment of anybody, no matter whether or not I agree with anything that you choose to do in your life or not do in your life. And by me saying that, I'm not making a statement about this particular policy. So anyway, I don't know. To me, that was really unfortunate.
Thank you. Reverend Butler.
Thank
I know
you,
you've been waiting
Madam
patiently.
Chair. So is a motion required for us to send it back to policy review. And the reason why I suggest this is because I don't think we had this conversation about this doing policy review and this. And so I think we need to go back and look at it, or we may spend the rest of this evening talking about it. But I think it's worth talking about again. So is there a motion required? If so, I'd make it.
I think it would be up to, I know, Susan, who made the original motion? I'm sorry.
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Horn made that original motion, and it was seconded by Dr. Butler.
Yes. And basically what my understanding is, or my desire is that you make a motion to put it on the floor for discussion, because you can't discuss it until you make the motion. So, well, I guess the question I asked was what the process. I need to listen to the answer.
We could do a substitute motion.
You can make a substitute motion.
So I would make the substitute motion that we send this back to policy review.
I need to, yeah. So, Ms. Horn, no, I'm sorry, Ms. Christie, you were next for discussion on this.
Yeah, I just think we need to make it clear how these policies end up on the agenda anyway, right? I mean, and, you know, maybe Mr. Dupler, you can speak to this, but we are required as a board to review our policies. And that's why we have regular policy review meetings. We take it by sections. And when we review a section and language has changed or state law has changed or something like that, we typically change our policies to reflect that. It happens all the time. You see it frequently. I think that there might be some misconceptions that the board just randomly pulled this policy. So I do want to make it clear how this policy ended up on this agenda to begin with. And maybe you can speak to the frequency of that. I don't know if it's necessary, but I do think that's important to note.
I think you said it best, Ms. Christie. I mean, these policies, it's the board's primary duty to enact policy. And so as such, these policies are constantly being looked at. Now, I mean, it's not just the whole policy manual every month. It's usually, you know, like you said, a section or two every 2 months. But yeah, I mean, unless there's some type of specific legal change, you know, they're not just picked out. And this one in particular, to your point, was just part of a group of student policies that was up for review. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Dupler. Ms. Horn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm glad you brought that up, that this is just a policy that we were reviewing, and this is not the board making some sort of political statement. I think the public is trying to make it sound like we're making a political statement. That's not what we were doing. This is changing to, I think if you read the policy, you see that we're not tolerating harassment of students from anyone toward anyone in any group. So I'm fine with taking it back to policy review, but I'm in favor of changing it to be a more broad term, because I think it does include everyone. And I think if we start having a list of groups, that we're going to have a policy that's like 400 pages long. So I think that we need to, we really need to think about that. And, you know, as Mr. Watson said, we're trying to focus our policies so that they are as concise as they can be, but also communicate what they need to. I would certainly never want anybody to think that, that this board did not care about the safety of students. As Dr. Reiswick said at the very beginning of the meeting, we care about the safety of every student, regardless of who they are. So that never came up in policy review. That was never part of it. I think in policy review, I think we did talk about that the intention was to change it to match other policies and to be in line with the policies that we have elsewhere that simply have that list that we do see in other places. So I'm fine with taking it back to policy review, but I think, you know, basically, that's my opinion on it.
Thank you, Ms. Horn. Mr. Triplett?
Yeah, truth is, the policy would have the same effect if we put a period after the word reason. We don't, does not discriminate in its programs, nor does it tolerate harassment for any reason, period. Harassment is defined, and go down to that last sentence. It would have the same weight. I do think that if you start getting into naming, you're just going to be, how far are you going to go with that? So I'm content with the policy as we have edited it, but if we want to take it back to policy review and have the same discussion, then that's fine, but I'm content with the way it is.
I agree with Mr. Triplett. I'm fine with the policy the way it is, but if we want to take it back to policy review and have a more robust discussion again, I'm fine with that, I guess. So we're now, Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the policy, the other policy that Mr. Duper was referencing was G-220, and that's actually our employee harassment policy. It'd probably be good to discuss both at the same time, because if they both have the similar language, my guess is at some point when that came around in that section, we would have the same conversation, and we should probably address both. And to the point of some of our public forum speakers, as I stated already, I do think the intent of the board was in good faith, and it was, we came to this honestly. If you look at our collective histories in the U.S., certain things we say send certain messages to certain people, whether or not we want to or not. And somebody, I think, made the point to employees that might be LGBTQ or other who might perceive this. And if we get into the same conversation with that policy around our employees and harassment, there's signals that get sent, right? We've seen that. We've seen the evidence of that. And again, like Mr. Duper said, on both sides of the aisle. So I think it's important not only for us to bring this back to policy, but we should probably have a robust conversation about this relative to both policies. So,
Thank you, Mr. Watson. If there's no more discussion, we will vote on the substitute motion. Ms. Coney, can you read that substitute motion again?
Yes, the
Please.
substitute motion was to send policy J-210, harassment of students, back to policy review process.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.